Sean, and I'll let Juliana explain all about Sean.
Anna, you're on mute, love.
There we go, that's me. Sorry. Sean is an artist from Donegal. I got in touch with to see if we could do as a logo, because we didn't actually have something that was singularly kind of wanted to use on everything across the board. We had a piece of artwork from another artist, but we just kind of wanted something to kind of define us. So I got in touch with Sean, and we've been working together for a few months, going back and forward with ideas and things like that. And Sean has given us this logo. He's designed it, and he's given us it, and we think it just, well, I certainly, well, we all love it. He gave us various different kind of setups of it, and we can choose where we want to use it. But I'm just going to try and share this video. I've had a couple of technical difficulties this morning, so if someone can let me know if you can hear the volume on it okay, and I'll attempt to share it again. It worked fine the first time, but typical as these things happen, the sound wasn't working this morning, so I'm going to share it, and you can hear Sean and you can see his artwork, and I think Sean and us work well. I think he's definitely the man to do the logo. Okay, I'm going to give this a go.
I hope you're enjoying the sewing and the conference. My name is Sean Fitzgerald, and this is my art studio here in the northwest of Ireland, and I'm the artist who designed the logo for remembering the accused witches. There's a storm raging outside right now, so...
Just checking, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear it? Right.
Yes.
You can hear the video, yes.
Yes, Juliana, yes.
Doesn't interrupt us too much. You might be thinking, why are we listening to someone from Ireland rather than Scotland? Well, I live in Ulster, where people have gone back and forth tatty hooking for years from here, which is workers going from Ireland, Donegal and Ulster, wherever, for the potato harvest, where they found work in the bigger farms over in Scotland. Our trading, our culture has been heavily linked for years. So much so that some people mistake some of the Ulster accents here as Scottish rather than Irish. The local Gaelic here in Ulster is very similar to the Scots Gaelic. So much so that once I was out having a drink with a friend, and whose first language is Gaelic, and he went outside for a smoke and started to chat with somebody outside who was also having a smoke. And they spoke both their native languages. And at the end, my friend said, "What part of Donegal are you from?" which is the Gaeltacht here. And the person replied, "I'm from Scotland," and that it was their first time in Ireland. And they both laughed, realizing they were both speaking Gaelic and Gaelic. It's just to give you an idea of the strong links between us both. So what I'm going to tell about today is some of my artwork and the stories behind each one. So the first one I'm going to do is the logo for remembering the accused witches. When I was asked to do the logo for the group, I was warned nothing too witchy, no cats or witches' hats or the like. So we went for a straightforward representation of the thistle, the national emblem of Scotland, which is surrounded by a Celtic knot. Yes, knotwork like this is linked into Christian monks from illuminated manuscripts, like the Book of Kells and more. But through time, it became more than that. It became identity, Celtic, or in this case, of course, Scottish. I mainly draw Irish mythology and folklore, which again is very strongly linked to Scotland from the stories of Cuchulainn and the Cailleach. I'm obsessed with insular Celtic knotwork and incorporate them into illustrations from our myths, stories and beliefs. It gives them great grounding and almost roots them into an older, more ancient tradition. I've illustrated a book on the Lú Lá Fada of the Tuatha De Danann, bringing in the Morrigan, the Dagda, and many more gods, but I'll get back to that later. So what I want to go into now is accused Irish witches. So this here. is, if you can see that, I'll zoom it up. I suppose it'd be very apt to begin with this, with the murder of Petronilla de Mead, as it's the anniversary of her death 5 days ago. She was tortured and then burnt at the stake. Petronilla was a servant of Alice Kittler in the 13th century. Alice was the first recorded person condemned for witchcraft in Ireland. She was married 4 times, outliving each husband, so acquired a vast fortune in the process. In 1302, she and her second husband were briefly accused of killing her first husband, but nothing became of it. But it left a lot of rumour that she was killing them off. So by the time her fourth husband fell ill, all of a sudden in 1324, rumours that she was a witch were rife. After his death, his children and those of her previous 3 husbands all accused her of using poison and witchcraft. They brought their case before the Bishop of Ossory. The bishop investigated these accusations and saw Alice and her friends rejected the Christian faith. It was said that upon forcing open a cupboard in the basement, the bishop discovered a terrible assortment of jars and bowls of evil-smelling entrails of cocks and eyes of ravens and worms and sprays of deadly nightshade, dead men's hair and fragments of unbaptized babies, cooked in a pot made from the skull of a beheaded thief. It's something else when you think back on it. Petronilla de Mead was a handmaiden to Alice, and there's a record of her forced confession. So I have it here. On one of these occasions, by the crossroads outside the city, Alice had made an offering of 3 cocks to a certain demon whom she called Robert, son of Art, from the depths of the underworld. She had poured out the cock's blood, cut the animals into pieces, and mixed the intestines with spiders and other black worms like scorpions and a herb called yarrow, as well as with other herbs and horrible worms. She had boiled this mixture in a pot with the brains and clothes of a boy who had died without baptism and with the head of a robber who had been decapitated. Petronilla said she had several times consulted demons and received answers. This is Petronilla herself, rather than Alice. She had consented to a pact whereby she would be the medium between Alice and this demon Robert. In public, she said that with her own eyes she had seen the demon as 3 shapes in the form of 3 black men carrying an iron rod in the hand. This apparition happened by daylight, and while Petronilla herself was watching, the apparition had intercourse with Alice. So it's all really out there. There's this theory that when wheat is off or is gone moldy, it can create this kind of like a drug-like effect. So there's a theory that maybe Petronilla had eaten this, but it could be just torture and telling them what they wanted to hear. But anyway, Petronilla was tortured, flogged, and burned at the stake on the 3rd of November, which is just gone, in 1324 for witchcraft and heresy. She was the first person in Ireland to be burnt at the stake for these crimes and the first sentenced to death for heresy. Petronilla's daughter, Basilia, fled with Alice to England, and there's no trace of them, to my knowledge, after these events. I've also illustrated another accused witch. She was from Cork, where I'm from originally. So her name is Florence Newton. Getting a lot of reflections in that, so I'll just zoom it in again maybe. So this is Florence Goody Newton. who was committed to Youghal Prison in County Cork by the mayor of the town on the 24th of March 1661 for bewitching Mary Logden through a kiss. So Mary Longden was a maid at the house of John Pine in Youghal, and John Pine had a big interest in witch hunting or witch finding, and Florence called there begging for food. The maid Mary told her that she would not give her any of her master's food, and Florence seemed to be very angry and said, "Thou hasn't as good give it me," and she went away grumbling. So a week after, Mary was going to the water with a pail of cloth on her head, and she met Florence again. This time Florence kissed her and said, "Mary, I pray thee let thee and I be friends, for I bear thee no ill will, and I pray thee do thou bear me none." Which seems quite nice. Within maybe regret of her, being angry at the door when she was begging, But within a few days after, the maid said she saw a woman with a veil over her face stand by her bedside, and one standing by her was a little old man in silk cloths. This old man drew the veil off the woman's face, and there she saw that the woman was Florence. The old man told her to promise him to follow him, and if she did, she'd get all the things she loved. She answered that she would have nothing to do with him or nothing to say to him because her trust was in the Lord. So within a month, she fell very ill, as the maid now, and got violent fits and went into trance. When reading the Bible, it would suddenly be struck out of her hand, and she'd immediately go into a fit. She would vomit up needles, pins, horsetails, wool, and straw in these fits, and before the fit, many small stones would fall upon her and would follow her from one room to another. They would hit her on the head, shoulders, and arms, and then fall to the ground and vanish away. During these fits, she often saw Florence and shouted at her for tormenting her. So, poor Florence was put into prison, where she was subjected to witch tests by self-proclaimed witch finder Valentine Greatorex. They rammed wooden awls into her hands, which is, those woodworkers' tools for piercing small holes. I can't imagine. Florence's urine was poured on a tile, which was then brought to Mary to watch for any negative reaction it might have brought on. And then another test for witchcraft was an inability to recite the Lord's Prayer. Florence, who would have been like begging around Youghal, like would have been, they would have been uneducated. Now I'm only guessing, so it would be like, I would imagine they couldn't read or write, and so she stumbled over this prayer, and of course when you're being tortured, stumbled over this prayer several times, thus adding to the evidence against her. Several people attempted to help her while she was in prison to teach her the Lord's Prayer so she'd be let out. So one of them was one of the prison guards called Davy Jones, and he taught it to her, and in gratitude, Florence reached through the bars of her cell and kissed his hand. A few weeks later, Davy died, apparently cursing Florence on his deathbed. So the trial records are just missing in regards to her outcomes, so I'd imagine she died in prison. But yeah, absolutely horrific stuff again, isn't it? Of course, some people just might see this as history, but I leave these people's lives just as stories. They were real, just like you and I, and they lived a life and were wronged. So I suppose you know all that. That's why you're here. But I'm going to go into mythology, into a witch type figure, and this figure I mentioned earlier is the Cailleach or Cailleach, depending where you're from and pronunciation. So this is my, hang on if I can get this right. Wait a minute. This is my illustration. I'll zoom it in again of the Cailleach up at R.A.W.S in County Meath. I'll zoom it in again. This is my illustration of the Cailleach at R.A.W.S. There are various Neolithic passage cairns at R.A.W.S in County Meath, and here on this hill, R.A.W.S, it's known as Sliabh na Cally in Gaelic, which is Hill of the Witch. So Cailleach also means witch in Irish. So in folklore, the Cailleach or witch flew from one hill to the next, dropping stones from her apron, and the falling stones, they say in folklore, formed the passage cairns that are still there today. The Cailleach is in Scotland, the Isle of Man, and here in Ireland, and isn't, of course, like the witch figure we see in fiction. They're an old woman who represents the winter, starting from Samhain, which is today, and the cross quarter point between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice. So now I'd like to just show some of my other work, the more Celtic, not work-based pieces on mythology. So we're going to break away from the Irish witches and the Cailleach and that. So this here is a map I did, it's 11 years ago now, and the map is based on the local area. So I got very interested. Where I am is in the Gaeltacht in Donegal in Ulster in Ireland, and so this map is the local area. So this island is out the window there, but it's 8 miles out the window there, and I live here on the mainland, and this area is Clough Ceannailí or Clough Ceanfola. I don't know if you can see that. I'll stop putting it up on the screen because I think it's probably better if you see the actual piece like this. So I started looking at the landscape and the place names and checking out the stories linked around them, folklore and mythology around these places. So in the most ancient Irish text, I have to get this right, everything's backwards. So this island, Tory, was the first place mentioned in our Irish manuscripts. So Tory was the first people, you'll hear different accounts, but really the first people not to go on to Ireland but onto Tory were the Fomorians. Okay, so now this is written by monks, so they would say they were from ancient Libya, right? So it's part of Africa. So this they would have landed here in Tory, and they would have said, oh, they were like pirates, and they would have raided here in the mainland. And so in the story there was okay, so the two of the Danann would have lived here on the mainland, and the Fomorians were on the island. And on the island here, if you can see that, on this tip of the island, there is Balor's Fort. Now, in archaeology, it has been a fort, and there was 20 huts around that fort in that part of the island. And the Balor it was prophesied when Balor was a child that if he had a daughter, the daughter would bear a son, and so his grandson would then kill him. So he decided he would lock his daughter into this tower here on this side of the island, Tower Moor. And so the whole story is about how his daughter becomes pregnant and bears a son, and then the son becomes Lula Fada. So Lula Fada, like, I could tell this story, but I'll base it on the drawings and the map, and hopefully we can have a bit of a flow here with the drawings. So when everything's okay, so Lou would have came here. When Balor found out that his daughter was pregnant, he said he'd kill the man who made his daughter pregnant. Man Cian McAneely lived here around here, at Drum na Tinne, which translates as the Hill of Fire. And then he came over, and there is a large quartz stone, maybe 2-ton stone, where he cut Cian's head off. And so it's still here in our place names. And then Lu, who was the sun, this whole area way back at all of Donegal would have been Shli Ludach, so it would have been the worship of Lu Lafada, and some people would see him as the god of light. And then you have Dun Leary, which would have been Lu's fort. So I'm linking in all the place names and history into these stories, because I suppose that's what we've always done, you know. So, okay, here's Balor himself, actually. So this is Balor of the Evil Eye. So I've put Fomorians around him, and then his eye was this kind of like Medusa, you know. It was that kind of tortoise eye, I would say. In the mythology, in the stories, they say like it took 20 men to lift up this patch that was over his eye. There was all these other stories, but in order to draw him and draw him into the story, I had to kind of make him a bit smaller, because it just didn't really fit in some of the other stories. So again, I just gave his eye, I just tried to make it look as venomous as possible. But again, part of the landscape. The reason I gave him antlers is antlers look cool, but also I've read this book about the devil and the origins of the devil, and they were saying that would say the whole idea of a horned god came from the pagan gods, so that a lot of the pagan gods had horns. So this angel that fell in the Bible or whatever from heaven eventually became this horned god. A lot of people would say it was Pan or whatever. But so I started adding kind of these antlers and things, and of course antlers are of such significance as well in kind of I suppose you'd say pagan beliefs of being kind of a symbol of rebirth and all this. So I just thought it was a very strong element. No, Balor isn't a god. He's more like a warlord or chieftain, you know, even though he's kind of like this almost godlike status. But I just thought like the skull and antlers would look very menacing as well as powerful on him, you know. So again, traditional knots. These knots here are okay. So they're all this edge here. It's from the Book of Kells, and I use the edges like this here. Like this is part of insular Celtic knotwork, but it's not the usual one you'd think of. But I find it breaks up space between the knots. So then these knots again, very much based on like the Book of Kells would be a lot of the stuff I've based my stuff on, the knotwork that is. So then hang on, I'll get another piece and it might show up the knotwork. This one's quite big. So this one is a boar. So a boar would have been a big symbol with my family name, Fitzgerald. So again, animals would come in a lot into belief and ancient beliefs here. And of course, the hunters as well would have been, boar would have been such a tough one to get as well as the stag, I would imagine. So these knots, I've kind of added plants and stuff. So again, I'm taking it slightly away from the style of the ancient monks by adding nature elements. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's sort of taking back, you could say reimagining and all this sort of thing. Maybe I'd be just blowholing then really, but it's really, I like taking elements from an ancient art that is very much a Celtic or Irish, Scottish, Isle of Man, that France even identity, and using them. And in fact, also mentioning all those countries, it's like, of course, we have more nationalists who have tried to take in this as I am Irish, and they take our Celtic knotwork away and try and use it for themselves. And I became, well, anyway, so, but I love the idea that we're linked into France in these different places. Like I was in Portugal a couple of years ago, and I went down to the museum there, and there was these like Gaulish figures with torques and very much kind of, I suppose, Celtic, how we'd imagine Celtic warriors to look like, you know. like there was a festival called No Sanctuary Festival in Europe. I have it here on the wall. I'm trying to see where it was. It was in Serbia. So in Serbia, the guy who was organizing the festival was saying that fascists would use knotwork and stuff a lot in their work. So he was saying he wanted to reclaim it. So it made me a lot more of, reclaiming things, I suppose, in artwork and stuff, So it's reclaiming our history and our myths. So I'm just looking for a space to put these down where they don't get damaged. So then Balor, his grandson, Lou. So going back to our map, or can I bring up both at the same time? I'm not too sure. So here's our map, and on our map we have R.A.W.S, which is here, which is right by Dunlewy, where which is Lou's fort, and near here in Dore, there's a standing stone called the Clockstaller stone, which really means just like I think it's like a standing rock, and so that's where I decided I would draw Lou. So in local folklore, the battle between where Lou kills Balor took place in this area by R.A.W.S and the Clockstaller stone and all that, but the area is in Dunlewy, and it's called the Poison Glen. So here I've drawn different elements of the story. So that's the mountain. Sorry, I have to think backwards every time I'm showing bits on the map. So that's the mountain R.A.W.S, that's the Clockstaller stone. And then I'd read, of course, that Lou was on this, horse, and it is very much that kind of your standard, almost Conan the Barbarian. But again, I was trying to get in elements. So there is a theory that, so we don't know exactly where the name London comes from. There's different things behind it. So one is that it's Loudun, like that it's from Lou, because there's Lyon in France is also comes from Lou. It's kind of like Lou's fort as well, same as here. So I think they break down London something like, is it Lux? Latin is light, and then they break down Lou's name to mean light. So a lot of people would view him as god of light. So again, there is Balor looking all menacing, quite big behind these soldiers, kind of creeping up on Lou. And a lot of the rock art, which I find like Celtic art to me, I'm sure lots of people would disagree, but is almost like a follow-on from the spirals and that we have in our rock art. So the rock art here is from Brún na Brána. It's from Newgrange, obviously very famous one here. Oh yeah, and going back to the London one, I wanted to link in London. So this is, what is it, the Battersea shield. So that shield was found in London. So I thought it'd be a nice element to put that shield in with Lou as a visual element, And then of course Lou was also famous for his spear. There was actually a group here a while back, did a big walk, calling it Lou's spear, following a sort of a track of Lou kind of thing. So now we're going to move away slightly for a while from the story of Lou, and I have another more of a traditional Celtic piece. So there's this one. So this, a lot of things in knotwork come in threes. So you'll find a lot of elements of three between in the drawings of animals, or be it characters. And another one is beard pullers. So you'll see Celtic knot pieces with two people pulling each other's beards, and it could be humor. Who knows? I don't know. But as a visually, it looks great. So these I have intertwined, and the idea between it is kind of like that, it's relying on each other and supporting one another. We'll get places, so they're all interlinked, and it's under the shadow of each other we will survive, So it was done as an anti-bullying piece, as a coming together and speaking out for one another type of piece. So, okay. Now the next here, this is Maeve. Yeah, a friend of mine saw this and they were like, "Oh, Sean, that's very sexist. Why are you drawing nude women? You know?" But I don't view it as sexist. It's the last thing I want to be. Um, so Maeve, now there was a Queen Maeve and there was the Goddess Maeve. So Queen Maeve in our history was named after the goddess, but the stories get very intertwined, you know, when you're talking of Maeve. So Maeve, a lot of people didn't really like Maeve in reading the books because Ireland's hero is Cuchulainn, and of course Cuchulainn is in Scotland as well, because Cuchulainn as a child went over and got trained with the Scotach, who was in the Isle of Skye, and I visited her castle there. There's not many castles you can remember. You can, in fact, there's none in Irish mythology or Scottish mythology you can visit and actually walk over. Like it's walking out there. There's like a drawbridge going out onto the castle. What is it? It's Dún Scathach, is it? And you walk out and just the views and everything. And of course, your imagination runs riot, like thinking of Cuchulainn. But anyway, Cuchulainn's one of his enemies was Maeve. So Maeve's very famous that she asked to be buried facing her enemies in Ulster, and she I think she had her sword, or no, her spear and her shield standing upright facing Ulster. So she's buried in Sligo in Knocknarea, on a huge cairn up there. But here locally, will I go back to our map here locally? So there is like a shrine, I suppose, to Maeve. So this here is Muckish Mountain. So that also is a cairn, a lot smaller and not Maeve's burial site, but it's like it's more like that there was worship of her here. So it's called Maskin Maeve, Maeve's cairn. There's another one in Roscommon actually. So Maeve was also very famous. It was like the whole from mythology with this prized brown bull, hence the having the knotwork. Don't know, can you see that? Okay. So anyway, in the story, the reason why she's nude, I'll go back to the point, is how they were so frightened of Maeve because she was such a mighty warrior. Was a guy who was set out to kill her, trained for something like 3 days, and practiced from how many meters? It was 10 meters from where she used to bathe. So she used to bathe here, and this is how he killed her. So there's all her weapons here on this side, this side, and then I don't know if you can see now with this kind of light, but I've tried to make them creepy. There are two eyes peering in the background there. Like you can just about see them. So we'll say it's not going to come in this light, but see right by this stone here. Now you can see there is two eyes just there. Where are we? Here. See them? So they threw a stone at Maeve, killing her. So again, she was known as the most beautiful woman in Ireland and all this sort of thing. But she was mocked afterwards. I found, which I really didn't like, was they said, "Oh, she was killed by a block of cheese, a hard block of cheese, which hit her between the eyes from this guy." But to me, it just demeans her and lessens her. It's like she was a mighty warrior, and they were scared shitless of her that they were hiding in behind this from such a distance to kill her. You know. Anyway, so the next character is a well-known character in mythology, and that is the Morrigan. So the Morrigan is largely portrayed as very gothic, black hair, and I suppose sexy, all that kind of stuff. Whereas the Morrigan was a lot more than that. So as a goddess in Irish mythology, she was like in the Battle of Moytura, Witloo against his grandfather Balor. To go back to that again, she was basically not instigating, but she was encouraging the men. She was behind everything. Like to go into the Morrigan, we'd be here for the evening. Kind of the thinking behind her and various stories about her. But that is my representation of her. It took me a while because I wanted to represent her very well. So I'd read pieces of the red-lipped woman, and again, I don't mean as in sexual. It was kind of more like I suppose it could be like bloodthirsty or something. Also of the red hair, and she would have been slightly older and not the young, sexy woman that people portray her as a lot. People have kind of also put her into that kind of Morgan Le Fay, is it, in English mythology. But yeah, so again, here I have her in the battlefield, and again, it's not the glory of war. I like when I drew Lou in that previous picture that I was showing you, I was afraid that I was kind of glorifying war, because that's not my intention. It's like for this, it was really just to show the the battle, the aftermath, the that it's horrific. Like, and she is in this ritual type of. Because after the battle in her mythology, she gives a prophecy of the end of the world, really, and of how things are to come, will be to come. So again, I've like hidden a small bit of a shield gig in there on the skull, if you can see them. And again, the Morrigan is also very linked with Crow as well. So anyway, okay. The next one, speaking of the Crow, that lines up nicely. So this is Bav. So there we go. The Battle Crow. So, gee, another nude. Again, it's not about sexism or anything. Okay, this is in our story. So the Morrigan is made up of 3. Okay, one of them is Bav, the Battle Crow, and this is them at the Battle of Moichuro. So they would fly from a tree, that like picture a crow kind of cawing, and that kind of they would like I basically I picture them like attacking people as they're coming in from the air in battle. So again, going through so many drawings, you'd have to go into a lot to actually start explaining these 3 goddesses that make up the one. But yeah, it's very linked in with the Morrigan. So, do you remember earlier I was telling you about the beard pullers? So I did up another rendition of them, and I decided I would kind of, so normally the beard pullers, now this is based on a George Bain piece, where normally they're kind of drinking, and it's 2 guys with beards drinking from cups. So I changed them to just drinking horns, and give them these antlers again, the skull heads, which I enjoy adding to various characters. And I made one of them more of a female looking character. Not necessarily female either. You can make of it what you will. But just to add a slightly different flavour. And again, I'm using this border, which isn't your standard knots, to break up all the knot work, and I think it can define different lines and things like that. So since the time is in it, this is sewn. So this is another piece, so quite small. So Samhain, the celebration of Halloween, if you want, was celebrated at Clachta, right, down in County Meath, which was this fort on a hill where they had fires. And again, I always go back to the antlers pieces, because I also think of in mythology, I include Scottish mythology in this, of we have shapeshifters. So I always think of that kind of, when we were talking earlier of Florence and the Maid Mary going into trances, and I just pictured this kind of trance-like state of people going into or changing into different animals, and that, Here's the goddess Anya. So she, like, people would normally say Lu is the sun god, but there, if you want to get into all that, but the Lu would be like a god of light, and then our sun goddess would be Anya. There's also the goddess Grain as well. So again, that's in Limerick. And here we have the seasons. Now these are going by the Georgian calendar, so I don't know, are they reading the right way around? Hopefully. I've just linked up traditional pieces, but again, linking in the Celtic gear. I've linked in Robert Graves' Om, even though that's very, very criticised to the year, because like you could really pick a lot of holes at that book, The White Goddess, that Robert Graves did. He was the one who was connecting Om to the different points of year. So what I did was I put them in, but then written around it is much criticised. Like I love the idea of it, but it doesn't work too well. Well, when you're reading Robert Graves' version. And next, this is Winter Solstice, which is going to be our next season on the 21st of December. And do you remember the boar we saw earlier? I have that linked in because, again, boars were very much linked into ritual space and time, so as were cranes and things. And so I have them, yeah, a bit cold, right, to be like that, but I have them here with the forest, the moon, and just kind of darker elements, you know. Again, traditional, not going through it. I like doing kind of bits of, I call them kind of rags and stuff going through the knots, just so it's not too tidy. And I like putting ferns. Ferns is a favorite one of mine, in through the knots, and oak leaves. Again, it's kind of reclaiming things from the church. I don't know. So let's see, do I have other pieces here? I think that's it. Listen, thank you so much. I know I went off the subject here of witches. Originally, the talk was just about the drawings, but I decided I really wanted to link it in rather than being on here just talking about my art and being kind of full of ego. I said, okay, what I'm doing and linking it into the accused Scottish witches. So thanks so much for listening and watching and for your support. Okay, all right, thank you.
Wow, that was fantastic. I enjoyed that.
That was great. It was a bit longer than I was anticipating, so sorry if everybody's trying to stick to the timetable, but it was fascinating, and obviously he's very passionate about what he's doing, and beautiful artwork, and we're very, very grateful to him for doing a logo for us. That was a real coup, Juliana, to get that.
Thanks to Sean.
Sean, very generous. On the timetable, we've got a wee bit of catch up about what R.A.W.S has been doing or what's going to come next. So if there are any questions anybody's got about R.A.W.S, please do get in touch now. We'll have a very brief thing after the lunch break as well, before we have the next set of speakers. Juliana, did you want to move anything around, or?
No, I think we're okay.
We're okay.
Okay.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So would any of the committee like to come on and talk about, is Laura there? I'd like to get Laura on if she can, and talk about the new item that we've got and we need to announce.
Yes, I am here. Hi everyone. I hope you can hear me. I, like everybody else today, have been having some problems with my internet. Always on the day. Yes, I think we wanted to talk a little bit about our website that we've launched just today in time for the conference. I'm going to share my screen now, if you don't mind, just for a minute or two. I know we're eager to get away for some lunch. So you can get to our new site now, which is www.rawes.scot. And basically you can see a little bit about what we're working towards as an organisation. You can read a little bit about our history. I've been working with R.A.W.S since the conference last November, their first virtual conference, and I was really inspired by the amount of work they've done already and in helping them with this website. I'm really pleased that we've got a bit of a platform to show all the work that's already been done and the journey that we're on. So you're welcome to check this out, maybe over lunch or after the conference today. We'll make sure to share that in the chat box. On there, we have, along with that background, we've got some resources if you're interested in researching use witches in your area. We've got a bit of a guide getting started, which you're welcome to have a look at. We've also got some recommended reading, and I'm sure we'll be adding to that today with some recommendations from our speakers. So you'll see lots of archives and databases you can access, some books as well, some familiar names, of course, from our programme today. On top of that, we also have a blog where we'll be sharing up-to-date research as we go along. Already, we've got some contributions from our steering group and from some other speakers today, including Mary Craig, Heather Upfield, who attended our last conference as well. You can read some of the work that she's been doing, and we will be adding to that, so do check back. You can also find a link to the programme there if you wanted to keep an eye on what's coming up for the rest of the conference. If you'd like to get in touch, we also have our contact details there, and information about upcoming events will be shared there as well as our previous events. So you can watch recordings of last year's conference if you just can't get enough of conferences today. But I'm really pleased we've been able to launch that, and I'll pop that into the chat box now if you'd like to have a look. And yes, I'm so glad to see you all here at the conference today, and it's been lovely to contribute to a small part to R.A.W.S journey. So thanks for letting me speak.
Thank you, Laura. We are so appreciative. I mean, you are a full member of the committee, but we don't really get to see you very often to say how grateful we are that you have taken this on, because it looks absolutely beautiful and there's power of work in there. So from everybody on the committee, I think I'm right in saying thank you very much for doing that. And I hope that you do get a chance, everybody who's at the conference, to have a look at this website. As you say, it's been launched today, so you are preview people. And if you find anything that's not right or that you want to question, please do give us a chat or get in touch with us by the various emails that are on the website. So enjoy your lunch. I think we're going to stop now for lunch, and we'll get back together at, what time was it? I've lost my thing. Where's it gone? We'll get back together at about 12:35. You can stay on. There's nothing happening over lunch. We need to get away and go to the loo, etc. So, but you can stay on if you want to, or I'll let you back into the waiting room when we come back at 12:35. Okay, thanks very much.
If you can see that. Anyway, I've got here a constitution is 14 pages long. It is the basis of a legal document for trustees. The problem is we're all volunteers, and most of us are pretty new to working along with a sort of quasi legal document. But if you get charitable status, you have to. So we've had a bit of a learning curve. For instance, whenever we were awarded charitable status, one of the things you have to do is use your charitable number and a logo, the Oscar logo, that's the ruling body, on every bit of correspondence that you send, either electronically or physically. So that was a bit of a learning curve, because you've got to get all these wee things onto onto your letterheads and footers. It's usually a footer for that. So I'm glad that there's was in the group and was able to do all that kind of thing. I think that's the first thing I should say as secretary, that Liz is my right hand go-to person for all these kind of things. But it's been a learning curve, but I think we're getting there, and hopefully we can take things forward as a charity now we've got our website, of course, thanks to Laura, that we can move forward a bit quicker. Sheila?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the most, the weirdest things have taken the longest amount of time. The things you think are going to be really simple have been really complicated. And the things that you think are going to be really, really complicated have actually proven to be really straightforward. Because as Donald says, none of us have ever done anything like this before. And I certainly know that Donald, myself and Liz, mainly because we don't work full time, we have been able to take part in some of the trustees week that have been going on by the Oscar the last week. And I certainly know, having spoken to Liz about this, we now know a whole load of things that we know we don't know. So we now have to go back and sort out policies and procedures and things like that, you know, to make sure that we do everything smoothly and that we are able to raise as much money to meet our goals as possible. But being a charity was, or becoming a charity was a huge piece of work that Donald undertook, having had limited experience of doing this before. But again, we have involved Fife Voluntary Action with this because, you know, we need to check that what we're doing is okay. And Oscar have been really helpful as well. But like I said, me and Liz just spent the week doing how to be a trustee, how to manage your board, how, you know, and all that. And it is quite an undertaking. And we're all really committed to doing all this work. Having the website, along with the YouTube channel, the Facebook, the Instagram, and the Twitter, has also been a learning because, you know, we started this thing off on a Facebook page and then we sort of added Twitter to it, and then we added it as a private page, and, you know, we've been growing and learning as we go, and that's what's so amazing about it. And meeting such a diverse mixture of people from, mostly Fife, like we said, because it was a Fife-based group to start with, has been an absolute joy. Yes, there are days when I think if I have to stare at this computer, you know, a minute longer, I'm going to go insane. But there's also the plus of that is like you finding a piece of research and following that thread through is very rewarding sometimes as well. So yeah, we've in the last year we've grown. You know, our numbers, the followers on all the social media has grown significantly. You know, we've kind of doubled our number on Facebook, which is brilliant. We've started negotiations with, we've been in negotiations with the Scottish Parliament. We're talking to the Church of Scotland. We've become a charity. We've got a website. We're doing our third conference. Again, we'd hope to do that live, but we can't. We love to do pieces of collaborative stuff. We like to promote other projects as well, like Heel and Harrow. The girls there are amazing, and their music to do with the witch trials and their work with Mary Kidd. That's all going to be launched in the new year, which is brilliant. You should keep an eye out for that. The Silver Spoon Collective, the memorial spoons. Oh, we are itching to get a spoon to do for that. And the Sandpaper Project and all the work by the people with that. I mean, it is it's such a wonderful community to be part of. And I hope that we can bring lots of information and experiences to people that will inspire them about, you know, this time in Scottish history and how important it is and what we can learn from it. As Julian Goodyear said earlier on, how much we can learn from the past about being better people in the future, especially if we're moving towards looking at being independent and whatnot. We need, you know, to accept our Scottishness and our Scottish history and be proud of it. And I think I'll just stop now because I could just wang on for about 3 days about how brilliant the project is and how much fun it's been.
I'm come back in now. Thank you very much for doing that. That's great. When we are going to move on with our next speaker, again, please put things in the chat if you want to ask us any questions. Julian Goodyear has just been on the chat and has emailed Juliana and the R.A.W.S email with a list of further reading, so we can send that out via Eventbrite to everybody who's here. That's not a problem. That'll come after the event. Okay, thanks very much. I'm now going to pass you over to Dr. Laura Harrison. and she is going to talk about memorials. Am I right? Yes? I hope
Yes.
so.
That's great. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to. All right, I'm just going to share my screen, so if you'll bear with me a second. Right, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So sometimes my internet connection doesn't love when I'm sharing my screen. So if there's too much of a lag, then let me know and I can stop doing so. So yeah, thank you so much to the organizers for having me today. I'm actually based in Dunfermline. So while I'm sad that we can't be meeting in person at the Glen like has been in the past, I'm really glad that so many were able to join online, as we said, is the benefit, if there is any benefit, of the current pandemic. So my talk today is going to be a little bit different from most of the others today, as I am in no way an expert on the history of accused witches or witchcraft in Scotland. Instead, what I'm here to talk about is commemoration and the role of memorials in Scottish history as well as today. So understanding how we remember the past has really been the through line of my career from my doctoral thesis, which looked at 19th century commemorations of the medieval Scottish Wars of Independence, and I'll get to an example of that a bit later on, to my current role with Historic Environment Scotland, where I'm a cultural resources advisor. So my team at R.A.W.S is responsible for giving historical and archaeological advice for the 338 properties in care. And this can include everything from advising on archaeological mitigation for works happening across the estate, to answering queries and supervising filming, to working with our interpretation team when they're updating the interpretation at the sites, and lots of things in between that. I wanted to start the talk by considering this memorial, which is located on a R.A.W.S site, the Witch's Well Memorial Fountain on the Esplanade of Edinburgh Castle, which Juliana mentioned this morning. It commemorates the people, mainly women, who were historically accused of witchcraft and executed on Castle Hill. Though it is relatively small in scale, the Witch's Well Memorial Fountain is beautifully made, and it really is a work of art. The designer, John Duncan, was a leading figure in Scottish art of the time, and he was working here in a Celtic revival and symbolist style. It dates from 1894, when it was commissioned by Patrick Geddes. The exact history of the piece and the sequence of its installation is something that we're currently trying to figure out. The fountain is accompanied by a bronze dedication panel, which is dated 1912, but we don't know if it was placed earlier than that since it was created in 1894. It's affixed to the former Castle Hill Reservoir, which supplied piped water to the upper parts of the Royal Mile, though it's not in operation at the moment. The decorations on the fountain are incredibly ornate and are thought to invoke dualism to show the balance between good and evil, or that every story has two sides. You'll also see from the flowers in this picture, I just took this photo this past week, that's also sort of a site for people leaving commemorations. So the flowers are, people leaving those on the monument. So I wanted to start with this, as until I began researching for this paper, I had no idea that it existed. As Juliana said, it's quite hard to see despite being right in the middle of the Esplanade. This is despite not only working for the organization responsible for the land that it sits on, but I also actually lived in the student halls that are approximately a 2-minute walk away when I first moved to Scotland nearly a decade ago. And this really is the point of my talk today. What makes memorials stand out or disappear into the landscape? And what can be done to ensure ongoing engagement with a memorial, such as one to accused witches of Scotland today? So I wanted to go back for a second and think about why we build memorials in the first place. So memorials are a form of commemoration, and at its core, commemoration refers to efforts to remember the past. Commemorative acts often memorialize the very recent past, but they can also commemorate events that are very far removed. Though commemorations can take place publicly or privately, they are largely based on the notion of the importance of widespread remembrance. Anne Rigney has suggested that commemoration is based on the idea that being remembered is more than a matter of being recorded in some archive. There is a sense that the history of some people and events from the past should not be left solely to historians and scholars, but rather also be present in the minds of the public. So commemorations can come in many different forms, and there's many more than are on this list that I'm sure you can think of, but some examples are fixed structures like statues, monuments, memorials, buildings, art like stained glass windows and murals, movable objects like books or photos or small memorabilia, personal commemorations like gravestones or commemorative benches, events like anniversaries, ceremonies, services, dinners, names, town names or street names or buildings or park names, locations like remembering someone's birthplace or events that happened in a location, and the list could certainly go on. Today, I'm focused on the public or collective commemorations rather than the personal. So in general, commemorations are important to study as they help to reinforce a common past upon which to base present collectiveness, and therefore they're a critical part of identity formation of a group. The agreement of a set of historical stories and traditions that should be remembered and preserved by a community is the basis for a collective identity. And identity in this way is essentially a self-fulfilling prophecy, since what you choose to remember determines how you identify, which thus influences what you choose to remember. Of course, identities are constantly in motion, which explains the ebb and flow in trends of commemoration. And commemorations are a way to show and reaffirm your identity, as the use of flags, monuments, and ceremonies are not a superfluous extravagance, but a central component of identity creation and maintenance. Commemorations can seem merely decorative or even passive, but they are essential to the formation and performance of identities, and therefore, I think, worthy of further study. So commemoration is one of the ways that collective memory is shared within a group. As Stefan Goebel has so succinctly suggested, remembrance is a process, memory the product. Since it's being continually constructed, cultural memory is also constantly changing as a result of the influences being placed upon it. Rigney has argued that collective memories are essential to the study of commemoration as they have their own histories. Therefore, there's an interesting dichotomy that exists when considering cultural memory. So each person engaging with commemorations have their own experiences and memories that shape their interactions with commemorative acts and dictate the level of significance they hold for them. However, in order for cultural memory to have an impact, there has to be a certain amount of agreement about that significance across a group of people. So this opens the door for the opposite, but equally important phenomena of cultural memory, which is cultural amnesia, or the collective agreement to forget parts of the past. So then coming down a little bit to memorials or monuments more specifically. So what is a memorial? It's one type of commemoration. They are a physical, often, but as we've seen lately, certainly not always permanent feature of the landscape. And they're made to commemorate a person, group of people, or an event. And again, they can take many different forms. Statues are often famous male figures or royalty. Buildings such as the Scottish National War Memorial at Edinburgh Castle. Benches, popular for private or personal remembrance. Cenotaphs and other war memorials, often intended to honor those buried elsewhere, as was the case with First and Second World War memorials in Scotland. Columns like Nelson's Column in London or the Dundas Column in St. Andrew's Square in Edinburgh, which has lots of reinterpretation happening around it at the moment. Fountains like the Witch's Well at Edinburgh Castle. Obelisks like the Washington Monument in America. Triumphal arches like the Arc de Triomphe. Plaques, which are can be placed on buildings or added to existing monuments to help provide context, again, like the Witch's Well in 1912 or the Dundas Column just recently. Funerary monuments, so gravestones, mausoleums, that sort of thing. And then art installations, and lots of recent monuments can be classed as art installations. And again, I'm sure you can think of lots more examples that you've come across in your own life for every single one of these instances. When you stop to think about it, examples of commemoration really are all around. So memorials have traditionally been considered a type of passive commemoration, where their role in inspiring subsequent commemoration diminishes quickly. This is in opposition to active commemorations, which have ongoing memorialization associated with them. My problem with this distinction is that at the time of the initial act of commemoration, such as when a monument is unveiled, all examples of commemoration are active. In addition, though a memorial has traditionally been passive in the past, it suggests nothing about future commemorative acts at that site. This has been brought into sharp relief in recent years, with memorials holding a central place in the Black Lives Matter protests, Rhodes Must Fall campaign, calls for the removal of figures associated with historical slavery and colonialism, and violent rallies such as those held in Charlottesville in America. So clearly, this traditional view requires re-examination, as the use of memorials and other commemorations is rather more nuanced than simply passive or active. So to give a Scottish example, in 1912, a monument dedicated to medieval hero Sir William Wallace was unveiled in Elderslie, Scotland, his disputed birthplace. The memorial is on a street that is now known as Wallace Street, and has long been associated with William Wallace, as Elderslie, as I said, was likely his birthplace. Indeed, this street features not only a memorial, but also a tree said to be associated with his life. Wallace's yew still stands, though Wallace's oak fell in the 19th century, we think. Both of these trees have been described as either being planted by Wallace or from the seeds of a tree he planted, or as a potential hiding place of his from English soldiers, though there's a new memorial to that elsewhere that we'll talk about in a minute. There's also a building said to be his birthplace, though this is pretty heavily disputed, as it was more than 700 years ago that he was born. And it might interest you to know, just judging from some comments at lunch, that this monument was publicly funded when it was built in 1912. So specific anniversary celebrations began in this area in the late 19th century, when annual parades on the 23rd of August, the anniversary of Wallace's execution in 1305, began to be held. In the early 20th century, there began to be calls for a Wallace Memorial to be built in Elderslie to accompany these anniversary celebrations. The building of the monument began in 1912, though it wasn't fully completed until after the First World War. The bronze plaques that you can see near the bottom weren't placed till the 1920s. Pretty quickly, the existing anniversary celebrations became a space for Scottish Home Rule demonstrations, an example of how standing commemorations can become politicized. From 1913, the demonstrations featured a procession to the monument, which was followed by speeches. These ceremonies changed slightly, however, in the interwar period. So for example, during the 1934 demonstration, the leader of the Scottish National Party at the time gave a speech, a wreath was laid on the monument, a lament was played by pipers, and this was followed by the sounding of the last post. A minute of silence was then observed, and the tribute of remembrance concluded with reveille on the bugle. Of course, as I'm sure everyone's familiar with, these rituals mirror the ceremonies normally associated with Armistice Day or Remembrance Day. And this is now a traditional series of events developed in the years following the First World War. So in 1919, the first anniversary of the armistice, King George was partially responsible for the introduction of the 2 minutes of silence. The other traditions were added in the following decade, and by 1927, the ceremonies were much more prescribed, and a description of 23 different ceremonies and different communities in Scotland show that they were nearly identical by the late 1920s. The requisite 2 minutes of silence was observed, wreaths were placed, the last post was nearly always played, politicians were present, and there was often a church service. So all of these Armistice Day events mirror what was occurring by the 1930s at the Wallace Memorial in Elderslie on the anniversary of Wallace's execution. The fact that a nearly identical ceremony to what was being performed to commemorate the dead of a recent war was also used to commemorate one man who died more than 600 years previously is, I think, pretty remarkable. That it was not seen as in any way inappropriate for Wallace to be publicly commemorated in the same manner as victims of a recent war shows the role of the medieval past in the commemoration following the First World War. The past has long been used as part of the healing process, as a way of making sense of events that have happened. This is a relatively common concept in medievalism, which is the study of the use of the Middle Ages in the present. So for example, Goebel has suggested aspects of the Middle Ages were regularly used following the First World War in order to make sense of the scale of loss, to quote him, in the commemoration of the Great War. Medievalism was transmuted into a discourse of mourning in an age of industrialized carnage. People constructed a narrative dating back to the Middle Ages in order to reconcile their contemporary mourning. So I wanted to share this example of the Wallace Memorial in Elderslie, as I think it shows how different commemorations can occur alongside memorials. So celebrations to mark the anniversary of Wallace's execution occurred in his supposed birthplace, Elderslie, which led to the creation of this monument. In turn, this monument became the site of ceremonies that mimicked those that developed following the First World War, showing the influence of the war on public ritual and customs. In addition, calls for Scottish Home Rule and increasingly Scottish independence grew throughout the interwar period, revealing how this space also became increasingly politicized following the war. The site continues to be a space for active commemoration with annual celebrations in August. The group now responsible for the annual ceremony, the Society for William Wallace, actually just unveiled a new monument dedicated to Wallace about 15 minutes up the road in Port Glasgow 2 weeks ago. The Elderslie Wallace Memorial also reveals how memorials are more complicated than being passive or active. The Wallace Memorial has commemorations in August of each year, though it's relatively quiet the rest of the time. It's also played host to different types of celebrations and demonstrations, as I mentioned, from anniversary celebrations to calls for Scottish Home Rule and eventually Scottish independence. The relevancy of the monument would also change from person to person. A tourist would look at it very differently than someone from Elderslie, or someone involved in the early celebrations, or someone who disagrees with the claim that Wallace was even born in Elderslie. So again, thinking about recent debates surrounding monuments show that a person's life experience can completely change how you look at a memorial. So let's consider what writer Roxane Gay said about memorials in an article entitled "How to Build a Monument." To build a monument is a time and labor intensive process. Someone decides a person or an era or events needs to be memorialized. They design an obelisk or a structure or a statue. In the case of a statue, a model is made, then a framework, and then a mold, and then a cast, and then that cast is filled with bronze, melted at 2000 degrees, and then the cast is removed, and the bronze is cleaned, and a patina is applied, and the statue is displayed in whatever way its designer deems fitting. It's all very intricate, which defies credulity when considering the horrors to which this intricacy has been applied. But that can change. We can change what we value and what deserves remembrance. We can learn to build new monuments to create a cultural memory that acknowledges the sins of the past, the realities of the present, and the possibilities for the future. So I particularly liked this quote, as I know that this new type of memorial that Gay describes is what you are trying to do with the National Memorial to Accused Witches. It's part of a much wider movement that is clearly, to come back to the title of my talk, potentially changing the role of memorials in Scotland today and in the future. Historians, heritage museums, professionals, campaigners, and many others are all questioning the role of memorials in Scotland and beyond. We're asking questions like, how else can we commemorate people and events? Does it have to be in the physical space? What about digitally? Who is missing from the narrative that we are presenting of history? How can we memorialize atrocities, both historical and modern? What do we do with existing problematic memorials? I think this is another opportunity where memorials and monuments can sit alongside other more innovative types of commemoration, sort of like with the Wallace Eldersley Monument, that there are, different commemorations that are occurring alongside the monument. And I think that that will become increasingly likely. So some recent examples that aren't necessarily monuments, but I think kind of work alongside existing monuments are online databases that make records publicly available for the first time, like the Legacies of British Slave Ownership and Runaway Slaves databases in the UK and Enslaved in America. Online activities like this one, accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic, which make talks and events more accessible. Crowdsourced commemorations, like the Mapping Memorials to Women in Scotland site. Walking tours, like the Edinburgh Caribbean Association's Black History Walking Tours and the Glasgow Women's Library Women's Heritage Walks, and also interactive maps like Queering the Map of Edinburgh. Also books that consider a different reality for physical monuments, as with Sarah Sheridan's Where Are the Women, which I have on screen, and similar creative responses from artists and residents, and also from young people, as outlined in Corinne Fowler's Green Unpleasant Land. One thing to do with potentially problematic statues are statue parks. There's a great example in Budapest and other former Soviet cities where the statues are taken sort of to and built a public park around, rather than in their sort of former places of glory. And again, obviously there's a lot of work ongoing in this issue, far more than I could cover today, but just to think about how these could interact with a memorial such as the one you would like to build. So rather than keep going on about this, I want to turn now to thinking about a national memorial to the accused witches of Scotland and how to ensure ongoing commemoration and relevancy of such a memorial. There are a few things that struck me when putting together this talk that seem to be a common thread in terms of ensuring active ongoing commemoration. And I'm sure you've already considered a lot of these issues at length, but hopefully there's something useful in here, either for this memorial or indeed for anyone else who may be considering engaging in commemoration of some description. So first of all, and my first one is a little bit more of a thought, the rest are a little bit more advice, but one thought I had was about tying together existing memorials. As we all know, as I gave an example of it earlier, there are existing memorials to accused witches and sites of execution, such as the one at Edinburgh Castle. Looking at the Mapping Memorials to Women in Scotland website, there are some other local commemorations to those accused of witchcraft. So how can a national memorial tie all of these together? I'm thinking particularly of how there are memorials to the First and Second World War, and how there is virtually one in every town in Scotland, yet no one argues that the National War Memorial at Edinburgh Castle shouldn't exist. So what are the different roles of these memorials, and how can a national memorial to the accused witches fulfill a different role than some of these local ones? Oh, sorry. The second point to think about is relevancy. So commemoration is much more about the present than it is about the past. So why does the memorial matter today? How do you ensure continued relevancy in the future? The third is community engagement. So ongoing engagement with a memorial helps ensure relevancy. This could be regular ceremonies or celebrations near a monument, regular cleanups of associated commemorations, or one example I like is people leaving trinkets and things around monuments, as one might leave flowers by a gravestone. The picture on the screen is of a Wallace memorial in London, near where the spot where he was executed. And as you can see, there is nearly always sort of changing memorabilia and things that people leave, whether it's saltire flags or bits of like bunches of roses and things. Once I went and there was an iron brew there, which I loved. I think that was my favorite one. So yeah, how do these sorts of things get started, and how do you keep them going? There are also more formal examples of community engagement, like the Adopt a Monument program, which supports community groups to explore, conserve, and promote their local heritage. And I think that the idea of it being crowdfunded would certainly help with that community engagement aspect. Number 4 is associated commemorations. So again, as we saw with the Elderslie Wallace example, ongoing commemorations help ensure relevancy. So the best advice that I ever heard in this regard is the best memorials are conversations. So how do you keep conversations going around a memorial? And then finally, location. The old real estate adage of location, location, location is also true of monuments. Will there be regular footfall? Is there invested local community nearby? Are the rights to the land insured into the future? All of those sort of nitty-gritty questions. So to quickly wrap up my talk, I want to applaud the committee for thinking beyond the practicalities of getting a monument built and thinking about the ongoing commemoration of them as well. And I want to leave you with another quote from Roxane Gay, because I thought this was very appropriate. Every culture throughout history has dedicated an unfathomable amount of resources to the preservation of lives lived and lost. Monarchic reigns, elected leaders, wars, and the men and women who fought in them, and the deities they worship. It is only in recent years that we have begun to memorialize atrocities and the lives sacrificed to hatred and oppression. It is only in recent years that we have acknowledged the importance of reminders of our failings as much as we remember our successes. So I wish you the best of luck with the campaign and the ongoing commemoration of the accused witches of Scotland. Thank you so much for listening. And I think that we have 5 minutes left in my time. So as long as the organizers are okay with that, I'm happy to answer a question or two if there are any. I will stop sharing my screen.
Fantastic. That was actually just what we wanted, just what we needed to make us think. We have been trying to list all of the existing monuments, and the idea is that eventually our website would host a map which would show all the existing monuments, but that's a work in progress at the moment. You've given us an awful lot to think about. There's a question from Mino, who's our treasurer. In terms of tying together existing memorials, this is linked, does Hess have a list of those related to our accused witches? Would you have a list of monuments as such?
We don't that I know of, no. Yeah, I think that the best resource for that is the Mapping Memorials to Women in Scotland database that they have online. But yeah, no, we don't have anything within Hess. And as far as I know, the only one actually on a Hess site is the one at Edinburgh Castle, though I am very prepared to be told that I am wrong about that as well.
Okay.
Sorry, can I?
Yeah, who's that?
So far, the best list I've been able to find about memorials is Greg's book, I have to say. Yeah. Unfortunately, Greg's not here, but one of our committee member, Greg Stewart, wrote a book about witch memorials, and he's listed a few in there. Well, obviously, because it's a book about memorials, but that's the biggest collection I found in one place so far, anyway.
But thank you very much for making it so relevant to us. I love the quote from Roxane Gay, is it? Roxane Gay? Definitely be looking into those in more detail, but you've given us an awful lot to think about, and I'm hoping that we can invite you to a committee meeting in the future so that we can discuss more.
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to.
That really does tick all our boxes. So thank you very much. Does anybody else have, we've got great talk, Laura, thank you. Really enjoyed this talk, lots to consider, thank you. Anybody else got a question before we move on to the next speaker? Say thank you very much to Laura, because that was really good. Sheila.
Sorry, Laura. I have a question. Laura, you mentioned street naming, and I actually forgot when I was telling about the things we've done. We've actually been looking at naming streets after accused witches, and hopefully one in St Monan's, small East Neuk fishing village, is going to be memorialising one of their accused witches in a new housing block that's getting built. I mean, do you find that that's a common way? It seems to be a common way to remember men in places, but do you think that it's becoming more about women as well?
Yeah, I think so. And I do think that street names are something that we're all really familiar with. So they're a really effective way of of doing commemoration, because if you see, you know, a name that you don't know, I think people are likely to look it up. So Sarah Sheridan's book, Where Are the Women? Yeah, goes into that a little bit. Yeah, and I feel it is Hess published that book, I feel like I should say, but I would be talking about it regardless because it's a brilliant book. Yeah, and I do feel like that made me especially consider like how many streets in a day, as you say, that you pass that are named after men. It's at least in Dunfermline, we have a few Margarets and things thrown in there. But yes, absolutely. I think that is a really interesting way of approaching commemoration, definitely, and worthwhile.
We here love Sarah Sheridan, don't we?
Perfect.
We do. She was a speaker at our last conference, actually.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, she's wonderful.